The dust in Bittercreek had a habit of settling on people like judgment. It clung to boots, to coat hems, to the folds of a woman's skirt as she stepped off the stagecoach and into the eyes of a town that had already decided what to think of her. Cora Mae Hollister was not the kind of woman Bittercreek was used to seeing with a deed in her hand. She was big, yes, thick through the hips, broad at the shoulders, with arms made for work and a back shaped by silence. Her dress strained at the seams, in the heat, damp with the sweat of the journey. But it wasn't her size that turned heads, it was her certainty. There was no flinching in her step, no apology in the way she looked up at the cracked sign of the livery stable, or nodded once toward the saloon, as if taking measure of the place. She had the eyes of someone who had made peace with being watched. "Well, I'll be," drawled Darla Bell from her porch chair across the dusty road. "Must be another cook, come to clean up the mess." A few chuckles trailed the comment like tumbleweeds, low and sharp. Cora didn't answer. She kept walking, her boots heavy on the planks of the boardwalk, toward the sheriff's office. She stepped into the dim interior, where the walls smelled of old sweat, cracked leather, and worn paper. Sheriff Amos Clay looked up from a half-eaten biscuit. His eyebrows rose. "Ma'am," he said, slow and deliberate, "I assume you're Cora Mae Hollister." "I am," she said. He set his biscuit down and reached into a drawer, pulling out a folded deed. "You sure about this? I've seen 30 men take a shot at that land. Good men. Young, strong, stubborn. Most left in debt. Some left limping. 1 or 2 never made it off alive." Cora stepped forward and took the paper, her fingers broad and calloused, handled it like scripture. "I'm not here for a shot, Sheriff," she said. "I'm here to stay." Sheriff Clay studied her a moment longer, then gave a tight nod. "Well, I guess the land'll decide that." Out past the edge of Bittercreek, where the grass grew in patches and the wind spoke in long, dry sighs, lay the old Ranchero Ridge property. A busted fence gate swung like a drunk preacher. The barn leaned westward, its bones tired from the weight of years and failures. Dead tools rusted beneath the overhang. Dust coated everything in a film of forgetting. Cora stood at the edge of the property line, staring down the ridge like it had insulted her. "I've seen worse," she muttered, though no one was there to hear. Well, not quite no one. Jedediah Boone, the last hand left standing from the last man who failed, leaned on a fence post not far off, watching her. His hat sat low, his shirt sun-bleached and sweat-stained, arms crossed like he was guarding the last piece of pride he owned. "You lost," he called out. "No." "Looking for someone?" "No." He eyed her, then spit into the dirt. "Lady, I don't know who told you this land needed saving, but it don't take to charity. It eats folks. I'm not here to save it," she said. "I'm here to work it." He studied her for a beat too long, then chuckled low. "Well, good. Luck with that." She didn't respond. She walked past him, her gait steady, eyes on the barn, the field, the sky. Jed watched her go, then shook his head and walked back to the bunkhouse like a man retreating from a storm he couldn't name. That night, Cora slept on the floor of the ranch house. It was empty, save for a stove that barely worked and a cot that smelled of mildew. Wind blew through the gaps in the walls. Somewhere outside, a coyote cried, high and lonesome. She didn't light a lamp. She liked the dark. It was honest. It didn't care about the shape of her body or the years she'd carried alone. She rose before the sun, her limbs stiff but resolute. With a wash basin and a rag, she scrubbed the dust from the window frames, then took a hammer to the porch steps. She pulled nails from the old fence with a grunt and drove them back in straighter. By mid-morning, her arms ached, but there was a new sound in the air, the creak of things being put back where they belonged. At the general store, they watched her. Darla Bell again. Ain't no woman gonna fix what 30 men broke. The shop boy giggled when she hoisted a sack of feed over her shoulder without help. She didn't flinch, didn't glare, just paid and left. She loaded her supplies onto the wagon with calm, practiced hands and rode back through town with her jaw tight and her eyes far away. Back at the ranch, a wild-eyed mare stood near the fence line, wary but hungry. Cora approached with a slice of apple and a soft voice. "You look like someone who's been let down a lot." The mare snorted, but didn't run. "I know the feeling." The next morning, the apple was gone. Jed saw it too. "You sweet-talking strays now," he said. Cora didn't look at him. "Everything starts with trust." Jed leaned against the fence, watching her for a while. "You're wasting your time." "You're still here," she said. He didn't reply, just adjusted his hat and wandered off. In the weeks that followed, the town kept watching for her to fall, to leave, to break. But she didn't. She worked slow and steady, like someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone but herself. She mended the chicken coop, cleared the stream, patched the barn roof. The mare came closer each day, until it let her touch its mane with careful fingers. Jed said less and less, but watched more. The men in the saloon joked that she was fat enough to feed the ranch for winter, but fewer laughed each time. There was something unsettling about watching a woman refuse to yield. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge and the earth glowed in copper light, Cora stood at the fence line. Her arms rested on the top rail. Her eyes followed the wind as it rolled over the hills like a song without words. Jed walked up beside her, slower than usual. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I'm not here to fit into anybody's story," she said quietly. "I'm here to write mine." They stood like that for a long time, silent, watching the day bleed into twilight. A hush settled over the land, a stillness that felt like permission. Inside, the ranch house was still bare. But that night, for the first time, she lit a lamp and placed it in the window. From the bunkhouse, Jed saw it and didn't look away. And somewhere, just beyond the ridge, clouds began to gather. The land was waking, and it was listening. The storm announced itself with a breathless stillness, the kind that made even birds fall quiet and cattle lift their heads in unspoken unease. The sky over Bittercreek bruised violet, heavy with something more than rain. It was as if the land held its breath, waiting to see who would flinch first. Cora Mae stood at the edge of the pasture, eyes narrowed toward the black line on the horizon. Her apron clung wet to her middle, her hair unpinned, lashed at her cheeks. Below her, in the lowlands, the herd gathered uneasily, skittish, restless. The river that curved through the southern field had risen overnight, muddy and angry, pushing against its banks like a drunk about to throw a punch. Jed Boone rode up beside her, his coat already soaked through. "You see that river?" he said, voice sharp above the wind. "She's gonna breach. We need to let the lower herd go. Cut the gate and pray the rest don't spook too hard." "No," Cora said, voice low and certain. Jed looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You plan to play hero now? Cattle ain't worth dying over." "I've worked every inch of this ranch," she said, not looking at him. "I've touched every fence, replaced every rotten board. If I let them die, it ain't just cattle. I'm losing its every inch of myself I've poured into this land." Jed hesitated. His hand rested on his saddle horn, caught between caution and awe. He opened his mouth to argue, but she was already moving, mounting her mare and guiding it downhill into the teeth of the storm. Rain came sideways, sharp as gravel. Lightning carved the sky in crooked veins, thunder like war drums behind it. The cattle bellowed and stomped, some already moving toward the ridge but others frozen with fear. The ground was slick with mud. Hoofs slipped and skidded, eyes rolled, white. Cora rode straight into the heart of it, waving her hat, shouting over the wind. "Up the ridge. Go, go now." Her voice cracked, but never wavered. She rode with fire in her blood and mud up to her knees. One of the steers fell in a trench, legs tangled. She jumped from the saddle, grunting as she hauled at its shoulder. It kicked once, panicked, nearly knocking her down. Still, she didn't give in. Her breath came in gasps, rain streaking her face like tears. She didn't have time to cry. Up on the ridge, townfolk had gathered. Word had spread like spilled whiskey. The fat woman who bought the cursed ranch was trying to save the herd herself. Sheriff Clay stood at the front, boots planted firm. Darla Bell clutched a shawl to her, chest eyes wide. No one spoke. They watched her drive the cattle uphill, soaked to the bone and shining with resolve. They watched her stumble and rise again. They watched as Jed finally rode down to her side, not to lead, but to follow. She looked over once, met his eyes in the dark, and nodded. He didn't smile, just turned his horse and flanked her, lending strength in silence. Together, they moved the herd toward higher ground, toward safety by dawn. The river had swallowed the pasture whole. The fence line disappeared under rushing water. The barn lower beams collapsed from the weight of flood. But the herd, muddy, shivering, alive, stood safe on the ridge. Huddled beneath a half-sheltered outcrop, Cora fell to her knees. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her breath came in ragged pieces. Jed dismounted and knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You did it?" he said. "You saved it all." She didn't reply. Not because she couldn't, but because there was nothing more to prove. Her silence was full. They stayed there, the two of them, beneath a morning sky beginning to bleed color back into the land. Later, the town trickled back into their routines. But something had shifted. At the general store, the boy who once laughed now tipped his hat. At the church steps, Darla Bell pressed a pie into Cora's hands with trembling fingers and no sarcasm in her voice. "She's made something out of nothing," people whispered, "out of herself." Sheriff Clay rode out to the ranch a week later. The water had receded, and Cora was already pulling fence posts from the mud, sleeves rolled to her elbows. He dismounted slow, thumb in his belt loop. "You know," he said, "we always figured someone'd have to tame this land, but maybe it just needed someone who could understand its hurt." Cora nodded, wiping her brow. "I didn't come here to tame anything. I came to belong." He looked around, then back at her. "Well, you do now." That night, Jed brought her a bundle of nails and a lantern that didn't flicker. No grand speeches, no declarations, just the things a person gives when they want to be part of something quietly enduring. They stood side by side, fitting new beams into the skeleton of the barn, hands working in rhythm. No music, just the creak of wood and the rustle of wind through repaired slats. Later, they sat on the porch, boots muddy, silence, comfortable. "You're not what I expected," he said again, like he was still trying to understand the shape of her. "I'm not here to be expected," she replied, eyes on the stars. He nodded. "Good." In the weeks that followed, life grew into the cracks she'd cleared. The grass came back green. Chickens laid. The mare followed her like a shadow. The ranch, once cursed, began to pulse with life again, slow and steady, like a second heartbeat. And still, she said little, but the town watched differently now. They saw her not as the fat woman who thought she could run a ranch, but as the woman who did. The one who showed up when the storm came. The one who took the reins and didn't ask permission. And when they whispered about her, it wasn't with laughter. It was with a kind of reverence, because no one else had lasted. One evening, under the same fading sky where she'd first stood, with nothing but hope and a deed, Cora sat alone. The ranch hummed behind her. The wind was warm, fragrant with wild sage and new grass. She looked toward the horizon, eyes soft. "Let them laugh," she whispered. "Let them always laugh, but let me keep building while they do." Because the truth she'd learned, out here in the ache of land and sky, was this: you don't have to be beautiful, or thin, or loud, or loved to take the reins. You just have to be willing to stay when others run, to work when no one believes in you, to rise again and again without applause. Some folks wait a lifetime for permission. Cora Mae Hollister had written her own, and Bittercreek, at last, had learned to listen. The sky turned the color of honey as twilight stretched long across the fields. Somewhere behind her, a door creaked open, Yet's footsteps, slow, steady. She didn't turn to look, she just made room beside her.